Colossians 3. Set your mind on things above. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. The morning light filtered through the small window, casting soft shadows across the stone floor. A man sat at a wooden table, his fingers tracing the edges of a worn parchment. His heart was full, yet his thoughts drifted beyond the room, beyond the city, beyond the earth itself. His mind was set on higher things. He had seen much in his years: the rise and fall of nations, the hunger of the flesh, the fleeting nature of riches. He had watched men toil for things that perished, chasing after wealth, power, and pleasure, only to find themselves empty. And yet, he had also seen something greater: a life transformed by Christ, a heart that no longer clung to the passing world, but reached for the eternal. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. He remembered his own journey, the moment he surrendered, the moment the old self was buried, the moment he stepped into a new creation. Once, he had sought the things of this world. Once, he had lived for himself, bound by desires that led only to destruction. But now, his life was not his own. He belonged to Christ. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. He had learned that transformation was not just a single moment, but a daily surrender. Every day the old self had to be crucified. Every day the flesh had to be laid down. Greed, impurity, anger, malice, they had no place in the life of one who belonged to the kingdom of heaven. These things did not define him anymore. Christ did. You used to walk in these ways, in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourselves of all such things. He thought of the people around him, the ones still entangled in the ways of the world, the ones striving for things that would not last. He longed for them to see, to understand, to be free. For once he too had been blind, but the grace of God had opened his eyes. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. The life of a believer was not just about removing the old, it was about putting on the new. Like garments freshly woven, the virtues of Christ were meant to cover those who followed him. He had learned that love was not merely a feeling, but an action, a choice made every day: to forgive, to be patient, to show mercy. These were the marks of those who had set their minds on things above. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. He had seen hearts ruled by many things: fear, anxiety, bitterness, pride. But the heart that belonged to Christ was ruled by peace. It was not a peace that came from circumstances, nor one that the world could offer. It was deeper, steadier, unshaken by trials or storms. It was the peace that came from knowing that no matter what happened, Christ was enough. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly. Faith was not something to be kept silent. The words of Christ were meant to fill the hearts and mouths of his people. Songs of gratitude, hymns of praise, wisdom spoken in love. These were the echoes of a life transformed. And so, as he lifted his eyes from the parchment, his heart was at rest. He had set his mind on things above. He knew that the world would pass away, that riches would fade, that even the strongest kingdoms would crumble, but Christ would remain. His kingdom was eternal, and those who belonged to him would share in his glory. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. The sun climbed higher, the light spilling across the room, a reminder of the greater light that would one day come. Until that day, he would continue forward, pressing on, setting his mind not on the things of this earth, but on things above. And in that he found his hope, his purpose, and his peace. Ephesians 6. The armor of God. Stand firm in faith. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. The battlefield stretched before him, unseen yet ever present. A soldier of faith stood at the edge, the weight of the world pressing upon his shoulders. The battle was not of flesh and blood, but of the Spirit, against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. He knew he could not fight alone. He needed strength beyond his own, and so he turned to the words that had been written upon his heart. Put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand, the first piece awaited him, the belt of truth. He fastened it around his waist, securing himself with the word that never wavered. Lies and deception sought to entangle him, but truth would hold him firm. The truth of who God was, the truth of his promises, the truth that set him free. Next he took up the breastplate of righteousness. He placed it over his heart, guarding what was most vulnerable, not his own righteousness, which was as fragile as dust, but the righteousness of Christ. It was this that covered him, shielding him from guilt, from shame, from the accusations of the enemy. No weapon formed against him could penetrate it. Then he bent down, preparing his feet. He fitted them with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. With each step, he would carry the good news. The path ahead might be treacherous, but peace would be his guide. No storm, no trial, no attack could shake the foundation upon which he stood. He looked up and reached for the shield of faith. As he lifted it, he felt its strength. Arrows flew from the darkness, flaming with doubt, with fear, with temptation. Yet the shield did not waver. Faith extinguished every attack. Faith held firm. Faith declared that even when he could not see, God was still with him. Upon his head he placed the helmet of salvation. It rested upon his mind, guarding his thoughts. The enemy whispered lies, but salvation was his assurance. He was redeemed. He was chosen. He was secure in the hands of the Almighty. The battle might rage, but his destiny was certain. Finally, he reached for the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. The blade gleamed, not crafted by human hands, but forged in divine truth. With it he would stand against the darkness. He would not only defend, but advance. The word of God was living, active, sharper than any two-edged sword. With it he would fight, not with hatred, but with love, not with anger, but with truth, not with despair, but with unwavering hope. The soldier stood, fully clad in the armor given to him by God. The battle was fierce, but he was not afraid, for he did not fight alone. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Prayer, the weapon unseen, yet more powerful than any sword. It was not just armor he wore, it was communion with the one who led him into battle. He prayed for strength, for wisdom, for endurance. He prayed for his brothers and sisters in arms, that they too would stand firm. He prayed for those still lost, that they would come to know the truth. And as he stood upon the battlefield of life, he knew this truth above all others. The victory was already won, not by his own might, nor by his own strength, but by the power of the one who had already triumphed. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. The armor was in place, the soldier was ready, and no force in heaven or earth could stand against the power of God. The battle belonged to the Lord. Judith 4. The people cry out to God for deliverance. Then all the men of Israel cried to God with great fervor, and they humbled themselves with much fasting. The news spread like wildfire. Holofernes, the general of the mighty Assyrian army, was marching toward them. City after city had fallen. Fortresses had crumbled. No nation had been able to withstand the power of Assyria. And now their eyes were set on Israel. Fear gripped the hearts of the people. The once peaceful towns of Judah stirred with anxiety as word reached Jerusalem. The enemy was vast, their weapons unmatched, their pride unshaken. And Israel, a small nation scattered in villages surrounded by hills with no army to rival their oppressors. But Israel had something greater. They had God. The people knew that their hope did not rest in swords or shields, but in the Lord of heaven and earth. And so they turned to him. With one voice from every village and hilltop, they cried out in prayer. All the men of Israel cried to God with great fervor, and they humbled themselves with much fasting. It was not a time for pride nor for empty words. It was a time for repentance, a time for humility, a time to seek the mercy of the one who had delivered them in generations past. They clothed themselves in sackcloth. They sprinkled ashes on their heads. Even the women and children fasted. The priests fell before the altar, offering burnt sacrifices and lifting their voices in intercession. From Jerusalem to the surrounding towns, the people pleaded for God to look upon their affliction and defend his name. Lord God of heaven, see their pride and have mercy on your inheritance. They remembered how God had parted the Red Sea, how he had caused the walls of Jericho to fall, how he had given victory to Gideon with just 300 men. And now, with the enemy at their gates, they believed he could deliver again. It was not a cry of despair, but a cry of faith. Even though the danger was real and the threat imminent, their hearts turned upward. They placed their confidence not in man, but in the covenant God who had never failed them. They did not know how he would act. They did not know when, but they believed he would. In every generation there comes a moment when the people of God must choose: will they trust in their strength, or will they humble themselves and call upon the Lord? Judith 4 captures that sacred moment. A nation united not by military might but by prayer. A people who chose to seek the face of God rather than fear the face of man. And God heard, though the deliverance would come in a way they could not imagine. Through the hands of a faithful woman named Judith, their prayers laid the foundation for victory. Because when God's people cry out, heaven listens. And when heaven moves, no army, no power, no enemy can stand in the way. So what about you? What battle do you face? What fear stands at your gates? Let Judith 4 remind you: deliverance begins with prayer. Victory begins with humility. Strength begins when we surrender, not to the enemy but to the Lord. Lift your eyes, bend your knees, cry out to the God who still delivers, because he is not finished. And he is not far. He is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. And when his people pray, he moves. Judith 8. Judith rises in faith and trusts God's power over armies. Who are you to put God to the test today, and to set yourselves up in the place of God in the midst of the children of men? The city of Bethulia sat under siege. Fear had crept into every household. Water was scarce. Strength was fading, and hope was beginning to slip through the fingers of the weary. The Assyrian army, vast and unrelenting, had encircled the people of Israel, threatening to destroy them. Every path out was blocked, every cry for help unanswered. Among the leaders there were voices of despair. Among the people there were murmurs of surrender. But one woman had not lost heart. She was a widow, Judith, daughter of faith and courage. Though cloaked in mourning, her soul was wrapped in strength. She had fasted and prayed, seeking the face of God while others looked only at the face of the enemy. She had heard the voices of the elders, their plans to wait just 5 more days before yielding. But Judith knew deliverance would not come by delay or negotiation. It would come by the hand of the Lord. And so she rose. She called the leaders to her home, a place of humility but also of wisdom. Her voice was calm, yet carried the fire of conviction. She reminded them of who their God was, not limited by time, not constrained by circumstance, not dependent on numbers or swords. She rebuked the doubt that had crept into their hearts and called them back to trust. Do not bind the purposes of the Lord our God, she said, for God is not like a man, to be threatened or to change his plans. Her words pierced through fear like light breaking through a storm. This was not arrogance, it was faith, a faith forged in silence and prayer, a faith that refused to bow before fear. That night she washed herself. She put on garments of beauty, not to seduce, but to step into the role God had called her to. She adorned herself not for glory, but for the mission ahead. With ashes behind her and purpose before her, she walked toward the gates of the city, accompanied only by her maid and the quiet assurance of heaven. Into the heart of the enemy's camp she went. It was a place where few would dare tread. Yet Judith did not tremble. Her trust was not in herself, nor in her clever words. Her trust was in the one who rules over kings and commands angels. Holofernes, the commander of the Assyrian army, welcomed her with suspicion and intrigue. He saw only a woman. He did not see the God who stood behind her. How often does God choose the unlikely to accomplish the impossible? Judith did not come with weapons of war. She came with wisdom, with discernment, with faith. She waited patiently, speaking little, watching much, and when the moment came, she acted. Not with rage but with obedience, not for vengeance but for deliverance. Her victory would echo through Israel, not because she was strong, but because she was surrendered. In a time when men feared, a woman believed. She returned to Bethulia not with fanfare, but with evidence of God's power. The enemy commander lay defeated, not by swords but by the hand of a woman chosen for a purpose. And the people rejoiced not in Judith alone, but in the Lord who had delivered them. Blessed are you, O daughter, by the Most High God. The people sang, above all women on the earth. Judith had not only saved her people, she had reminded them who their God truly was. When fear surrounds, when the enemy seems greater, when the path forward is hidden, faith can still rise, trust can still speak, and God can still deliver. Let every heart remember, God does not need many. He needs one who will believe. God does not require strength. He honors surrender. And even in the darkest hour, He is still the God who saves. Judith rose, and through her God moved. Obadiah 1. Edom's pride will fall, and the Lord will deliver Zion. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rocks, and make your home on the heights, you who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? The mountains of Edom stood tall and proud, their cities carved into the cliffs, their people confident in their strength. From their rocky strongholds, they looked down with contempt, certain that no one could touch them. They trusted in their position, in their allies, in their own wisdom. But the word of the Lord came through the prophet Obadiah, not to Israel, but to Edom, a warning, a judgment, a reckoning. Though you soar like the eagle, and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. Edom had exalted itself. In pride it had lifted its head high above others. And when disaster fell upon Judah, when Jerusalem was invaded, and its people scattered, Edom did not weep. Instead, it rejoiced. It stood aloof, watching its brother stumble. It cheered as enemies looted the city. It even joined in, blocking the escape of the survivors and handing them over to their captors. They forgot the ancient bond between them. Edom descended from Esau, the brother of Jacob, but their pride had made them blind. Their arrogance had made them cruel. And now, the Lord would answer, because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. God does not overlook injustice. He sees every act of betrayal, every moment of prideful gloating, every injustice done to the weak and the suffering. The day of the Lord was coming, not just for Edom, but for all nations. And on that day, the scales would be balanced. The proud would fall. The oppressors would be humbled. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. The message was clear. What Edom had sown, it would reap. The high places it trusted in would become ruins. The allies it leaned on would betray it. The confidence it held would collapse beneath its feet. But in the midst of judgment, there was also hope, not for Edom, but for Zion. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy, and Jacob will possess his inheritance. The Lord had not forgotten his people, though they had been humbled, though they had suffered, though their city had been torn down, He would raise them up again. Mount Zion would not remain in ashes forever. A day of restoration was coming. A day of deliverance, a day when the faithful would inherit what God had promised. The kingdom will be the Lord's. In the end, it would not be Edom or Israel, not any earthly kingdom, that would rule. The proud would fall, the corrupt would fade, and only one kingdom would remain, God's kingdom. A kingdom where justice flows like a river, a kingdom where the humble are lifted up, a kingdom where righteousness reigns and the Lord himself dwells with his people. So to those who have been wronged, to those who have wept in silence, to those who have seen pride reign for too long, take heart. God sees, God remembers, and the day is coming when every high tower will fall and every faithful heart will rise. For the Lord will deliver Zion, and the kingdom will be his. Tobit 3. Prayers from the heart, and God sends the angel Raphael. And the prayer of both was heard in the presence of the glory of the great God. And Raphael was sent. The sun dipped low over Nineveh, casting long shadows across quiet homes and weary souls. Inside one such home, an old man named Tobit sat alone in darkness, not just the darkness of blindness, but the darkness of sorrow. Once a man of honor and good deeds, he had fallen into misfortune. He had buried the dead in secret. He had given to the poor, but now, blind and mocked even by those in his household, he was left feeling forgotten. Tobit's heart was heavy with grief, and his voice trembled as he lifted a prayer toward heaven. O Lord, you are righteous, and all your ways are mercy and truth. Deal with me as you will. Command my spirit to be taken from me, that I may be released from distress. It was a prayer born not from rebellion, but from honesty. The cry of a man who could no longer see the way forward, who longed for rest, for peace, for something beyond the pain. But his was not the only voice rising that day. Far away in Media, a young woman named Sarah sat in anguish of her own. She had been accused, shamed, and tormented. 7 times she had been given in marriage, and 7 times death had stolen each husband before the wedding night. Whispers followed her, calling her cursed, and in the silence of her chamber she too prayed. They accuse me falsely, O Lord, but I turn to you. Command that I be delivered from the earth, and never again be subject to such reproach. 2 hearts, 2 distant places, 2 prayers whispered in sorrow, and yet one God who hears. At that very moment, the prayers of both were heard in the glorious presence of God. And Raphael was sent. Heaven responded not with silence, but with action. God, who sees beyond the veil, who hears even the softest cries, answered with an angel. Raphael, whose name means God heals. He was sent not just to deliver a message, but to guide, to protect, to restore what was broken. For Tobit, sight would be returned. For Sarah, joy would come in place of shame. And for both, the divine hand of providence was already moving long before they could see the outcome. What seemed like isolated despair was in truth woven into a greater story, a story of redemption. We often believe that our pain is hidden, that our prayers fall into the silence of heaven. But the book of Tobit reminds us of a greater truth. God hears, and God sends. He sends healing. He sends help. He sends hope. Sometimes it comes through unexpected means, a stranger, a friend, a journey. Sometimes it comes through the silent presence of His Spirit. And sometimes, as with Tobit and Sarah, it comes through the ministry of angels, dispatched from the courts of glory in response to heartfelt prayer. Their meeting was not coincidence. It was divine orchestration. Tobit's son Tobias would go on a journey. Sarah would meet the one who would become her true husband. And Raphael, hidden in human form, would walk with them, guiding every step. Do not be afraid, Raphael would later say, for it was necessary that you go through this trial, so that God's mercy might be made known. What trial are you walking through? What sorrow has pressed on your heart like weight too heavy to carry? Lift it to Him. He sees, He hears, and He knows the plans He has for you. Plans to bring healing, not despair, peace, not shame, a future filled with hope, not pain. Sometimes the answers come quietly, sometimes they come disguised, and sometimes when the time is right, God sends His angels. So pray with honesty, cry out without shame, trust that even when you cannot see, heaven is already moving. For the God who answered Tobit and Sarah still answers today, and He still sends Raphael. Exodus 12. The Passover and God's mighty hand of deliverance. This is the day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. The night was unlike any other. Darkness cloaked the land of Egypt, heavy with tension, thick with silence. In every Hebrew home, the instructions had been followed with trembling hands and believing hearts. A lamb, pure and without blemish, had been chosen. Its blood painted on the doorposts, a sign, a covering, a shield. Inside, families gathered in quiet awe, eating the roasted lamb with bitter herbs and unleavened bread, ready to depart at a moment's notice. Cloaks tucked into belts, sandals on their feet, staffs in hand. This was no ordinary meal. It was the beginning of a new story. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. For generations they had been slaves. Their cries had risen like smoke from the fires of their oppression, reaching the ears of the Almighty. And now, the Lord's mighty hand was stretched out in judgment, not upon his people, but upon their captors. That night, the destroyer passed through the land. A cry rose from Egypt, loud, anguished and unrelenting, as every firstborn in the land was struck down. From the palace of Pharaoh to the prisoner in the dungeon, from the livestock in the field to the heir of the throne, there was no house untouched by grief. But the blood marked the homes of the Israelites, and where the blood was found, the judgment passed over. It is the Lord's Passover. The Lamb had taken their place, its life given so theirs might be spared. Through blood, they were protected. Through obedience, they were delivered. Pharaoh, broken and shaken, summoned Moses and Aaron in the night. Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. The chains of Egypt were finally broken. The doors of captivity swung open, and the people, laden with the silver and gold of their former masters, began their journey toward freedom. They did not leave as fugitives. They left as a people called, chosen, and redeemed. At the end of the 430 years to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. God had not forgotten his promise, not to Abraham, not to Isaac, not to Jacob, and not to the children of Israel. Through suffering, he had refined them. Through power, he had delivered them. And through the blood of the Lamb, he had made a way where there was no way. This night was not just a moment in history. It was a picture, a foreshadowing, a declaration of a greater deliverance to come. For one day, another Lamb would come, one without blemish or fault, and his blood would not cover just the doorposts of homes, but the hearts of all who believed. His sacrifice would not deliver from Pharaoh, but from sin and death itself. And through him, the final Passover would be fulfilled. This is a day you are to remember. And so they did. Year after year, generation after generation, the people of God remembered that night. The night the Lord passed over them. The night he stretched out his mighty hand. The night he showed that no power, no empire, no oppressor, no darkness could stand against his will. He is the God who sees, the God who hears, the God who saves. And when he moves with purpose and power. Exodus 12 reminds us, the blood still speaks, the Lamb still saves, and the God of deliverance is still near to all who call on his name. Let every heart remember, the Lord's hand is mighty, the Lamb is enough, and freedom is found in his promise. Exodus 17. Water from the rock and victory over Amalek. Moses struck the rock, and water came out of it for the people to drink. And as long as Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. There are seasons when the journey feels dry, when the promises of God seem distant, and the path is marked by thirst, weariness, and battle. Israel knew that wilderness well, freed from slavery, but not yet in the promised land. They wandered through the desert of testing, carrying both hope and complaint. In Rephidim, there was no water, no streams, no wells, only heat, dust, and desperation. The people quarreled with Moses. Their voices rose with accusation. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die of thirst? Fear made them forget the miracles. Frustration clouded their memory of God's faithfulness. And once again, they tested the Lord, asking, "Is the Lord among us or not?" But God does not abandon his people in their doubt. He told Moses to take his staff, the same one that struck the Nile, the same one raised over the Red Sea, and to stand before the people, not to scold, not to strike them down, but to strike the rock. And when he did, water flowed, cool, life-giving water poured from the hard, dry stone, enough to satisfy the thirst of a nation, enough to remind them that even in the driest places, the Lord provides. This was not just a miracle of hydration, it was a lesson in trust, that even when we cannot see the source, God is still our source, that His provision often comes from unexpected places, like water from a rock. But the story of Exodus 17 does not end with water. Soon after, the Amalekites came to fight against Israel. The battle was not just physical, it was spiritual, and God had a plan. Moses told Joshua to choose men and go out to fight. But while Joshua led the warriors, Moses went to the top of the hill with the staff of God in his hand. As long as he held his hands up, Israel prevailed. But when he grew tired and lowered them, Amalek gained ground. So Aaron and Hur came alongside him, one on each side. They held up his hands, steady and faithful, until sunset, and Israel won the battle. Because sometimes victory doesn't come through strength alone, but through surrendered hands. Sometimes the greatest act of leadership is simply staying faithful, even when you're tired. And sometimes the miracle comes when others stand beside you and hold you up. That day Moses built an altar and named it, "The Lord is my banner," for the battle had not been won by swords, but by the hand of God. This chapter in Israel's story teaches us two powerful truths. First, God provides in our desperation. Second, God gives victory in our weakness. When our hearts are dry and our strength is gone, He meets us with water from the rock and power from His presence. He sends support when our hands grow weary. He surrounds us with those who lift us when we cannot lift ourselves. Jesus too would be struck once for the sins of the world, and living water would flow from Him, pouring out grace to quench our deepest thirst. He would become both our rock and our banner, our provider and our defender. So when life feels like a desert, when the battles rage and your soul aches for something more, remember Rephidim. God still brings water from dry places. He still answers desperation with mercy. He still lifts up the weary and gives strength to the humble. And when you stand with arms raised, not in your own might, but in dependence on Him, you will see that the battle belongs to the Lord. The rock still stands, the water still flows, and the banner still waves over His people. The Lord is with us, even in the wilderness. 1 Kings 3. Solomon asks for wisdom, and God answers, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people, and to distinguish between right and wrong." There are moments in life when the weight of responsibility presses in, and the soul realizes it cannot carry the burden alone. In those moments, humility becomes strength, and the cry for wisdom becomes a doorway to divine blessing. Solomon was young when he became king, stepping into the footsteps of his father David, a man after God's own heart. The kingdom was now his to lead, but the path ahead was vast, the people many, and the decisions weighty. And so Solomon did something few leaders would dare to do. He admitted his need. He began his reign with worship. Solomon went to Gibeon, where the most important high place stood, and there he offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. It was an extravagant act of devotion, a bold declaration of honor to the God who had placed him on the throne. That night, as he lay in Gibeon, the Lord appeared to him in a dream. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you," God said. It was an invitation filled with possibility: riches, power, long life, victory over enemies. The options were limitless. But Solomon's heart was not drawn to selfish gain. Instead, he responded with reverence. "You have shown great kindness to your servant my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous in heart. And now you have made me king in his place. But I am only a little child, and do not know how to carry out my duties." His words were not of pride, but of humility. Solomon knew the task before him. The people he was to lead were not his. They belonged to God. They were a great nation, too numerous to count, and he, their king, did not ask for conquest or comfort, but for the one thing that could truly guide him. "So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people, and to distinguish between right and wrong." For who is able to govern this great people of yours? And the Lord was pleased. God saw in Solomon a heart that sought not self but service, a king who understood that leadership without wisdom would falter, a ruler who valued understanding above power. And so God responded with a promise that would mark Solomon's reign forever. Since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. God granted Solomon a wise and discerning heart, one unlike any before him, or any to come after. But the Lord did not stop there. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me, and keep my decrees and commands as your father David did, I will give you a long life. When Solomon awoke, the dream had ended, but the promise had only begun. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the Ark of the Covenant, and offered sacrifices and fellowship offerings to the Lord. Then he gave a feast for all his servants, a celebration not of personal gain, but of divine favor. And soon the wisdom God gave him would be tested. 2 women came before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same child. There were no witnesses, no clear evidence. The situation was fraught with pain and uncertainty. Yet Solomon, filled with God-given insight, discerned the truth not by accusation, but by the heart. Bring me a sword, he said. Cut the living child in 2, and give half to each woman. The real mother cried out in agony, willing to give up her child rather than see him harmed. And with that Solomon knew the truth. Do not kill the child, he said. Give him to the woman who begged for his life. She is his mother. Word of Solomon's wisdom spread quickly. All Israel heard of the judgment and stood in awe, realizing that God had given their king wisdom to administer justice. What began with a dream became a legacy. Solomon's request for wisdom became a model for generations to come, a reminder that true greatness is found in humility, that divine understanding surpasses earthly power, and that God delights in hearts that seek his guidance. In our own lives, when faced with challenges, decisions and responsibilities too great to bear, we are invited to do the same, to come before the Lord not with pride or demands, but with a simple, honest prayer. Give your servant a discerning heart. And just as he did with Solomon, the Lord still answers. He gives wisdom to those who ask in faith. He leads those who acknowledge their need. He honors those who honor him, not just with words but with a heart devoted to his will. So when you stand at a crossroads, when leadership or life calls for more than you have, remember the story of Solomon, not the king of splendor and riches, but the young man who knelt in worship and asked for wisdom, and trust that the same God who answered him will answer you. 1 Kings 19. The gentle whisper of God. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The mountain was silent. The wind had died down, the earth had stilled, the fire had faded, and in the hush of that sacred place, Elijah stood, weary and afraid, waiting for the voice of the Lord. He had seen the power of God. He had called down fire from heaven upon Mount Carmel. He had stood alone against the prophets of Baal, against a nation that had turned away. He had watched as the rains returned to a land long parched, as the drought that had cursed Israel was finally lifted. Yet now he was running. Queen Jezebel had sworn to kill him, and fear had taken hold of his heart. He had fled into the wilderness, leaving everything behind. He had collapsed beneath a broom tree, his strength gone, his spirit broken. "I have had enough, Lord," he prayed. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." But the Lord did not rebuke him. He did not abandon him. Instead, he sent an angel who touched him and said, "Get up and eat." Elijah opened his eyes and found bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, then lay down again. But the angel returned a second time, saying, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Strengthened by that meal, Elijah traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. He found a cave there and spent the night alone with his thoughts, alone with his fears. And then the voice of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah poured out his heart. "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty," he said. "The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord did not answer immediately. Instead, he told Elijah to stand on the mountain, for his presence was about to pass by. Then came a mighty wind, tearing through the mountains, shattering the rocks. But the Lord was not in the wind. Then came an earthquake, shaking the ground beneath him. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then came fire, blazing with power. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. Elijah pulled his cloak over his face, trembling, and stepped out to the entrance of the cave. The voice came again, soft but sure. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God was not in the storm. He was not in the shaking earth. He was not in the raging fire. He came instead in a whisper, gentle, quiet, yet undeniable. Elijah had expected the Lord to move in power, to bring judgment upon Israel, to answer his cries with fire and fury. But God was teaching him something greater. His presence was not always found in the spectacle, but in the stillness. The Lord had not forgotten him. He had not abandoned his people. Elijah was not as alone as he believed. There were still 7,000 in Israel who had not bowed to Baal, who had remained faithful, and there was still work to be done. "Go back the way you came," the Lord said. "Anoint Hazael as king over Aram, anoint Jehu as king over Israel, and anoint Elijah to succeed you as prophet." Elijah had felt defeated, but his story was not over. The Lord was not finished with him, and so, strengthened by the whisper of God, Elijah rose and set out once more. This is the way of the Lord. He speaks not only in fire and wind, not only in miracles and wonders, but in the still small voice that calls us in our darkest moments. He meets us in the quiet, in the broken places, in the whispers of grace that remind us we are never alone. You may find yourself in the wilderness, weary and afraid. You may stand upon the mountain, waiting for an answer. But listen closely. The voice of the Lord is near, not in the chaos, but in the quiet. He is still speaking. Will you listen? 2 Kings 2. Elijah is taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. The time had come. The journey that began with a whisper on Mount Horeb was nearing its divine conclusion. Elijah, the prophet who had called down fire from heaven, who had stood boldly against kings and false prophets, was now nearing the end of his earthly mission. But his departure would not be like any other. It would not be marked by death or burial, but by glory and awe. An exodus, not of flesh but of fire. He knew it. So did Elijah. Together they walked, step by step, from Gilgal to Bethel, from Bethel to Jericho, from Jericho to the Jordan. And at each place the company of prophets came out and whispered the same question to Elijah. "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "I know," Elijah replied, "but do not speak of it." Elijah's heart was heavy, yet resolute. He would not leave Elijah's side, not for a moment. The one who had mentored him, who had taught him to listen for the voice of the Lord in stillness and in fire, was about to be taken, and Elijah would not let go until the very end. Then came the Jordan River. 50 men stood at a distance watching. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the waters, and the river parted. The 2 prophets crossed over on dry ground, a moment reminiscent of Moses and the Red Sea, of Joshua and the Promised Land. The God who had moved through history was moving still. Once across, Elijah turned to Elijah. "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" And with boldness, Elijah asked not for wealth, not for fame, but for the heart of a prophet. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah looked at him solemnly. You have asked a difficult thing, yet if you see me, when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not. Then it happened, as they walked and talked, suddenly the heavens opened. A chariot of fire, drawn by horses of flame, appeared between them. In a whirlwind of divine power, Elijah was lifted from the earth and carried to heaven. Elijah cried out in anguish and awe, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And then Elijah was gone. Only his cloak remained. Elijah picked it up. The garment once worn by the fiery prophet was now his. A mantle passed, a calling confirmed. He walked back to the Jordan River, alone but not abandoned. He took the cloak, struck the waters, and called out, where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? The waters parted again. The same God who had parted seas for Moses, rivers for Joshua, and fire for Elijah, now moved for Elijah. And those who watched from a distance said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elijah. The story of Elijah did not end in death, but in glory. He had been faithful in the wilderness, bold before kings, and obedient to the still small voice of God. And in the end he was taken, not in silence, but in a chariot of fire, a heavenly escort for a servant well pleasing to the Lord. His departure marked the continuation, not the conclusion, of God's work. Elijah would now carry the mantle, but the power remained the Lord's. Even today, Elijah's ascent reminds us that those who walk closely with God leave a legacy far greater than themselves. Their lives become a testimony, their obedience a spark that ignites future generations. And the God who carried Elijah in a whirlwind still reigns, calling his people, empowering his servants, and reminding us that the journey of faith never ends in despair, but always in glory. So when the path ahead seems unclear, and you wonder if your labor is in vain, remember the chariot, remember the whirlwind, remember that those who walk with God are never truly alone, and their ending is never the end. It is only the beginning. 2 Kings 6. Open your eyes. Those who are with us are more. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The night was thick with silence, the air heavy with the scent of dust and stone. The city of Dothan lay still beneath the watchful eyes of a hidden enemy. The armies of Aram had come in the night, their horses and chariots encircling the city, their swords sharpened for war. The people slept, unaware that doom pressed in upon them. But within the city walls, a young servant stirred. The first light of dawn had barely touched the rooftops when he rose, stretching the sleep from his bones. He stepped outside, his heart light, ready to begin the day's tasks. And then he saw them, a sea of soldiers, their banners rippling in the morning breeze, their armor gleaming like the rising sun. His breath caught in his throat. Fear gripped him, cold and unrelenting. He turned, stumbling back into the house, his voice shaking as he called out, My master, what shall we do? Elisha, the prophet of the Lord, stood from his place of rest, his face calm, untroubled. He stepped forward, laying a steady hand upon the servant's shoulder. Do not be afraid, he said, his voice firm with quiet confidence. For those who are with us are more than those who are with them. The servant's brow furrowed, his breath uneven. He saw no army, no reinforcements, no sign of hope, only the enemy, countless and unyielding. His hands trembled. Then Elisha lifted his gaze to the heavens and prayed, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. And in that moment, the servant's vision shifted. The world as he knew it peeled away like a veil lifted from his eyes, and there before him was a sight beyond imagining. The mountains surrounding the city were filled, overflowing with horses and chariots of fire. Heavenly warriors stood, their presence radiant, their numbers beyond counting. The armies of God had come, unseen by human eyes, surrounding Elisha, surrounding the city, standing in power against the enemy below. Tears filled the young servant's eyes. His breath came in shudders, not from fear, but from awe. He had been blind to the greater reality, blind to the truth that had been there all along. But now he saw. Elisha stood firm, his faith unshaken. He raised his hands once more in prayer. Strike this people with blindness, O Lord. And just as the servant's eyes had been opened, so now the enemy's eyes were closed. Confusion spread through the camp like wildfire. Their vision darkened, their sense of direction lost. The soldiers who had come with certainty now stumbled in disarray. Elisha stepped forward, his voice steady, his presence commanding. This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. And so, blinded and bewildered, the army of Aram followed him, not into battle, but into the heart of Samaria, the stronghold of Israel. When they arrived, Elisha lifted his voice again in prayer. O Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see. The blindness lifted, the soldiers blinked, their vision returning, and then horror seized them as they realized where they stood, deep in the midst of their enemy's city, surrounded by Israel's army, utterly defenseless. The king of Israel, his sword in hand, turned to Elisha, his voice urgent. My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down? But Elisha shook his head, his gaze filled not with vengeance, but with wisdom. You shall not strike them down. Would you strike down those whom you have taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master. The king hesitated, but he obeyed. A great feast was prepared, food set before those who had come to destroy them. And when they had eaten and drunk, they were sent back to their master in peace. And from that day forward, the armies of Aram no longer raided the land of Israel. The young servant stood in the city, his heart forever changed. He had seen the unseen, had witnessed the armies of heaven standing guard over God's people. Fear had given way to faith, panic had given way to peace. Elisha's words lingered in his soul, a truth that would never fade. Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And so it remains. In the moments when the enemy surrounds, when the darkness presses close, when fear whispers that all is lost, may we remember what the servant could not see at first. The armies of the Lord stand ready. The battle belongs to him, and those who are with us are more. Wisdom 1. Love righteousness, and seek God with a pure heart. Love righteousness, you who judge the earth. Think of the Lord with uprightness, and seek him with sincerity of heart. The city was quiet as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden light on the marble pillars and winding streets. In one of its quiet corners, a teacher sat with parchment in hand, his thoughts turning toward eternity. His words were not for the careless or the proud, but for those who long to walk in truth, for rulers, judges, seekers of wisdom, and the humble-hearted who desire to live rightly before God, because he is found by those who do not put him to the test, and manifests himself to those who do not distrust him. He had watched the ways of men, their rise and fall, their schemes and ambitions. He had seen how easily power corrupts, and how swiftly hearts grow cold when detached from truth. And yet he had also seen something far greater, the beauty of righteousness, the peace of a heart aligned with God, the clarity that comes to those who seek not the approval of man, but the presence of the Almighty. Righteousness was not a burden, but a path, not a chain, but a light. It was the way of those who loved God with purity and sincerity. For perverse thoughts separate people from God, and when his power is tested, it exposes the foolish. There was a warning in his voice, a call to be careful with one's thoughts, for even the inner life was not hidden from God. Secret pride, hidden malice, subtle envy, these things crept like shadows into the soul, clouding judgment and separating the heart from its maker. But the one who turned away from these things, who sought God with a clean heart, would find him near. Wisdom will not enter a deceitful soul, nor dwell in a body enslaved to sin. How sacred a heart must be for wisdom to make its home there. The writer had come to see that true understanding was not found in intellect alone, nor in experience or age, but in holiness. Wisdom was a gift, divine and pure, and it would not abide where sin was cherished. It came gently, like a whisper, and remained with those who welcomed it with reverence. He urged his listeners to remember who God is, not blind, not distant, not indifferent, but holy, just, and intimately involved in the lives of those who love him. Because God is witness of the inmost self and sure observer of the heart and the tongue, there is no hiding from him, no pretending. He sees through masks and hears what is whispered in secret. His justice is not delayed, and his mercy is not withheld. He weighs the heart, and to those who walk in integrity, he draws near. So the message was clear. Love righteousness, not for the sake of appearances, not for religious duty, but because it is the path that leads to God himself. Seek him, not half-heartedly, not casually, but with a pure heart, with a longing that refuses to settle for anything less than his presence. For it is there, in that seeking, that wisdom begins to bloom. The teacher's words carried the weight of truth, not meant to condemn but to awaken, to stir the soul from slumber, to call the listener back to what mattered most. The Spirit of the Lord fills the world, and that which holds all things together knows every word spoken. Nothing escapes his sight, nothing is beyond his reach. And for those who walk uprightly, who love what is good and turn from evil, there is a promise. God will be found, wisdom will come, and righteousness will lead to peace. So let the call of wisdom one echo within your heart today. Love righteousness. Seek God with a pure heart. Turn from the shadows and walk in the light, because in the pursuit of God, you will find not only wisdom, but life itself. Hebrews 12. Run with perseverance. Fixing your eyes on Jesus. Let us run with perseverance. The race marked out for us. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. The path stretched long before them, winding through hills and valleys, the journey demanding and unrelenting. The air was thick with the sounds of weary footsteps, the breaths of those who had come so far, yet still had farther to go. This was no ordinary walk. This was a race. The writer of Hebrews spoke to those who knew struggle, who knew the weight of trials pressing upon their souls. To them he offered not empty words, but a call to endurance, to perseverance, to faith that would not falter. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. There were those who had gone before, those who had walked the same path, faced the same struggles, yet endured. Their stories lined the road, testaments of faith that had withstood the test of time. Abraham, who journeyed into the unknown, trusting the promises of God. Moses, who chose to suffer with the people of God, rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of Egypt. Rahab, who, though an outsider, believed and was saved. Each step of the race was marked by those who had run before, those who had finished well, and their testimony echoed through the ages. Keep running, but to run, one must let go. The weights, the burdens, the sins that so easily ensnare, the distractions that pull the heart away, the doubts that whisper, you cannot go on. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. This was not a sprint. This was a race of endurance. And at the heart of it one thing mattered most. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. The road was not easy. The climb was steep. The obstacles were many. But there ahead was Jesus, the one who had run this race before, the one who had endured the cross, scorning its shame, and now sat at the right hand of the throne of God. He knew the pain of suffering. He knew the weight of rejection. He knew what it meant to be weary, to be tempted, to be pressed on every side. Yet he did not falter. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The call was clear. Do not give up. Do not turn back. Do not lose heart. The road may be long, but he is with you. The trials may be great, but he has overcome. The burdens may be heavy, but he will sustain you. Run, not in your own strength, but in his, not with your own wisdom, but with faith in the one who has gone before you, not for a perishable prize, but for the joy set before you, to see his face, to hear his voice, to finish well. For in the end it is not about how fast you run, nor how strong you appear. It is about enduring to the finish, keeping your eyes on the one who never let go. And when the race is done, when the journey is complete, when the final step is taken, you will stand before him, victorious, knowing that through every mile, every hardship, every struggle, he was faithful. Run with perseverance. Fix your eyes on Jesus and finish well. Amos 5. Seek the Lord and live. Seek the Lord and live, or he will sweep through the tribes of Joseph like a fire. It will devour them, and Bethel will have no one to quench it. The land was still prosperous, the markets full, the cities humming with the sound of daily life. But beneath the surface something was breaking. Justice had grown silent, righteousness had been cast aside, and the cries of the oppressed echoed unheard through the streets. Amos, a simple shepherd and dresser of sycamore figs, had been called by God, not to soothe, but to awaken. His words were not welcomed by the powerful, yet they burned with the urgency of divine truth. Seek me and live, declared the Lord through Amos. It was a call not just to turn from sin, but to turn toward the one who gives life. The people had sought many things: wealth, status, comfort, but not the Lord. They clung to places like Bethel and Gilgal, religious centers filled with ritual but empty of repentance. And God warned that those places would offer no safety. Do not seek Bethel. Do not go to Gilgal. Do not journey to Beersheba, Amos cried. For Gilgal will surely go into exile, and Bethel will be reduced to nothing. Their religion had become a performance. Their sacrifices were many, their songs loud, but their hearts were far from the God they claimed to worship. They had forgotten what mattered most: mercy, justice, humility, and truth. There are those who turn justice into bitterness and cast righteousness to the ground. The Lord saw it all: the bribes, the corruption, the crushed poor, the silence of those who should have spoken up, and he would not overlook it. But even in judgment, his mercy reached out like a lifeline. Seek good, not evil, that you may live. Then the Lord God Almighty will be with you. It was not too late. If only they would turn. If only they would repent. Not just in words, but in action. Not just with offerings, but with lives shaped by the heart of God. I despise your religious festivals, said the Lord. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. God was not interested in empty songs or hollow praise. What he desired was justice flowing like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream, a people who loved what he loved, and lived as he called them to live. In the midst of a complacent nation, Amos's voice thundered with warning, but also with hope. If they would seek the Lord, not the comforts of tradition, not the strength of their wealth, but the presence of the living God, then life would return. Not just survival, but true life, rooted in justice, grounded in truth, overflowing with mercy. And the same call echoes still. Seek the Lord and live, not in the noise of religion without relationship, not in self-made security, but in the quiet place where hearts are laid bare before him. Seek good, hate evil, establish justice. Let your worship not be in word alone, but in the way you walk, the way you love, the way you stand for what is right. For the Lord Almighty is not distant. He is near to those who seek him in spirit and in truth. And he still calls out, return to me and live. Acts 9. Saul is transformed by God's grace. The road was dry and dust-covered, the sun high, fierce. Around Saul men traveled with purpose, unaware that the man they followed was about to fall. He had letters in his hand, authority, permission, power to bind and punish. His heart beat with certainty. Zeal, he called it, a holy fire to silence what he believed was blasphemy. The followers of Jesus were a threat to everything he stood for, and Saul, righteous in his own eyes, would snuff them out, one by one. But heaven had other plans. Without warning, a light split the sky, brighter than noon, purer than flame, and Saul fell. The persecutor was on the ground, the earth rising up to humble him. And then the voice, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Not my people, not my church, but me." The words pierced deeper than the light. In an instant, Saul realized the truth. He wasn't defending God, he was fighting him. "Who are you, Lord?" he asked. And the answer unraveled everything he thought he knew. "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." Then silence and blindness. The man who had led others now had to be led. The man with vision lost his sight. 3 days darkness, no food, no drink, just stillness, just waiting. But grace was moving. Across town another man listened. Ananias, afraid, conflicted. Why go to the one who came to destroy? But God spoke gently. "He is my chosen instrument." So Ananias went, not with fear, but with obedience. He entered the house, found Saul sitting in the shadows, and said the impossible. "Brother Saul," not enemy, not murderer, brother. He laid his hands on him, and light returned, not just to Saul, but to his soul. Scales fell, and so did the old man. In his place stood someone new, baptized, fed, strengthened. Then, without delay, Saul began to preach. The voice that once cursed the name of Jesus now proclaimed him. The hunter had become the witness. People were stunned, confused. Wasn't this the man who brought terror? The one who dragged believers away? And yet the proof stood before them, not in arguments, but in transformation. Because that's what grace does. It doesn't merely pardon the past, it creates a new future. It meets us on our Damascus roads, blinded by pride, convinced of our own rightness, and it knocks us down, not to condemn, but to reveal, to awaken, to rescue. Saul would spend the rest of his life proclaiming this grace. As Paul, he would write of the mercy that found him. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. He would carry scars, he would face beatings, prisons, rejection, but never again would he be blind. Never again would he chase shadows in the name of God, because the light had found him, grace had overtaken him, and love had transformed him. So if you're walking a road paved with certainty, driven by pride or pain, pause, listen for the voice, look for the light, and know this: no one is too far, no sin is too great, no past too stained. The God who met Saul still meets us today, on roads we built ourselves, in blindness we didn't choose, and with mercy we never saw coming. Salvation is not earned, it is given, freely, radically, forever. Because grace isn't just a second chance, it's a whole new beginning. Acts 16. Praise in the midnight prison brings breakthrough. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. The city of Philippi bustled with pride, wealthy, Roman, and full of power. Into that place of influence and idols came 2 messengers of the gospel, Paul and Silas. They didn't come to start a rebellion. They didn't come to gain applause. They came for souls, led by a vision, a Macedonian man crying out for help. They obeyed the call of God and entered Philippi. And at first things seemed to flourish. A woman named Lydia opened her heart to the message of Jesus, and her entire household was baptized. The gospel was breaking through, but the enemy does not sit quietly when light advances. There was a girl in the city, enslaved not only by masters but by a spirit of divination. Her voice, manipulated by darkness, shouted after Paul and Silas day after day, until finally, Paul, moved by the Holy Spirit, turned to her, not in anger, but in authority, and said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." In a moment the power of darkness broke. The girl was free, but the hearts of her masters were bound by greed. They saw not a miracle, but a loss of income, and the city erupted, dragged into the marketplace, accused falsely, stripped publicly, beaten harshly. thrown into the innermost prison, the place reserved for the worst of criminals. Their feet locked in stocks, their backs raw with wounds, their future uncertain. If ever there was a moment for fear, this was it. If ever there was a time for despair, this was the hour. But Paul and Silas didn't curse the darkness. They didn't rehearse the injustice. They didn't wallow in pain. They worshipped. About midnight, at the darkest hour, when the city slept, when the pain was fresh and the chains were tight, they lifted their voices, praying, singing, praising the God who had not changed. No band, no lights, just bleeding backs and bound feet. But heaven heard, and so did every prisoner. They weren't alone. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook. A violent earthquake, more than a tremor, more than coincidence. The foundations of the prison were shaken, and instantly doors flew open. Chains fell off. God moved in power, but no one ran, because the presence of God had filled that prison more powerfully than the earthquake. The jailer woke up and, thinking the prisoners had escaped, drew his sword to take his own life. But Paul cried out with urgency, "Don't harm yourself, we are all here." And in the flickering light of torches and trembling hands, the jailer fell to his knees, not before fugitives, but before witnesses. He had seen something greater than fear. He had heard worship in the darkness. He had witnessed power and mercy collide. He asked the most important question any soul can ask: what must I do to be saved? And the answer came like morning: believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household. That same hour, the jailer washed their wounds, and they baptized his soul, from pain to praise, from prison to purpose, from midnight to miracle. This is the power of God. This is what happens when praise becomes your weapon. When you lift your voice not because of your comfort, but because of His character. Because chains don't intimidate the one who breaks them. Because walls don't stop the one who walks through them. Because midnight is just the beginning of His breakthrough. So when your night is long, when the walls close in, when the fight feels unfair, worship anyway. Let praise rise, let prayer flow, let faith speak louder than fear. For the God who shook that prison in Philippi is still shaking strongholds today. Praise Him at midnight and watch the breakthrough come. Amen. Daniel 6. The lion's den. God's protection in the darkest hour. My God sent His angel, and He shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me. The kingdom of Persia stretched wide, its influence unchallenged. King Darius sat upon the throne, ruling over vast lands with power and authority. Among his officials, one man stood apart: Daniel, faithful, trustworthy, set apart. He had served kings before Darius. He had seen empires rise and fall, and through it all he remained devoted, not to earthly rulers, but to the Lord his God. Daniel was favored, not only by the king, but by the hand of God upon his life. His wisdom surpassed that of the other officials, and his integrity was unquestioned, so much so that Darius planned to set him over the entire kingdom. But favor brings opposition. Jealousy took root in the hearts of the other rulers. They searched for a flaw, a weakness, a mistake that could bring Daniel down, but they found none, unless it was in his faith. We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So they devised a plan. They approached the king with flattering words and deceitful hearts. O King Darius, live forever. Issue a decree that for the next 30 days no one may pray to any god or man except you, O king. Anyone who disobeys shall be thrown into the den of lions. It was a law of pride, designed to trap only one man, and the king, unaware of their true motives, signed it into effect. Daniel heard the decree. He knew the punishment, but he also knew his God, and so, just as he had always done, he went to his room, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and knelt in prayer 3 times a day. Just as before, just as always, the officials were waiting. They stormed into his home, caught him in prayer, and rushed to the king. Daniel, the one you favor, has defied your decree. Darius was grieved. He realized the trap too late. He spent the day searching for a way to save Daniel, But the law of the Medes and Persians could not be undone. At sunset he had no choice. Daniel was brought to the den, its entrance lined with jagged stone, the growls of hungry lions echoing within. The king's voice trembled as he spoke. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Then the stone was rolled over the entrance, sealing Daniel inside. Night fell, but the king found no rest. He refused food. He turned away from entertainment. Sleep fled from him as he awaited the morning. But in the den, the lions did not devour. The beasts that had torn others apart in moments lay silent, their mouths closed, their power restrained. For the God of Daniel had sent his angel. At the first light of dawn, Darius hurried to the den. His voice, desperate, called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And then the answer, "My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." The king was overjoyed. At once he commanded that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. But those who had schemed against him, their fate was different. They were thrown into the very pit they had prepared for Daniel, and before they even reached the ground, the lions overpowered them. Then Darius issued a new decree, not a law of pride, but of truth. "I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end." Daniel prospered. The kingdom knew of the power of the Lord, and the den of lions became a testimony that even in the darkest hour, even in the face of death, God is faithful to those who trust in him. For the same God who shut the mouths of lions still protects his people today. And when we face trials, when the enemy plots against us, when it seems that all is lost, we can trust in this: the Lord is with us, and he is able to save. Deuteronomy 7. The Lord chooses you as his precious people. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. There is something powerful about being chosen, not because of merit, not because of strength or beauty or greatness, but simply because of love. As the people of Israel stood on the edge of the promised land, the Lord, through his servant Moses, reminded them of their identity. They were not just a wandering tribe. They were not just survivors of slavery or travelers of the wilderness. They were chosen. They were his. Moses' voice carried the weight of divine truth, speaking to hearts that would soon be tempted to forget. "The Lord your God will bring you into the land you are about to possess," he said. "He will drive out the nations before you, 7 nations stronger and more numerous than you. But this conquest would not be achieved by Israel's might. It would be the hand of God who went before them. He would fight their battles. He would break down the walls, and in return he asked for their loyalty, their hearts. They were to make no alliances with the nations, no covenants, no compromises. Not because God despised those people, but because he loved his people too much to see them led astray. "Do not intermarry with them," Moses warned, "for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods." God was not commanding separation for the sake of isolation. He was protecting a relationship, a covenant built on faithfulness and love. Like a bride set apart for her groom, Israel was to remain holy, devoted, and undivided in heart. And then came the words that would echo for generations. "The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you, because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you, not because they were mighty, not because they earned it, but simply because he loved them." In a world that measures worth by size, strength, and success, God's love speaks a different language. He chooses the humble. He lifts the lowly. He sets his affection on the overlooked and the outnumbered. Israel was chosen not to boast but to bless, not to dominate but to declare the goodness of God to the nations. "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments." The covenant was clear. Love and obedience would bring blessing. Rebellion would bring consequence. Not because God delights in punishment, but because he longs to keep his people close, to draw them away from idols, to guard their hearts from the deception of false promises. So Moses gave them a charge: destroy the images, tear down the altars, do not be ensnared by their gods. It was a call to purity, a call to vigilance, a call to remember who they were and whose they were. God promised them victory, but he also promised presence, provision, blessing in abundance. The Lord will bless you more than any other people. You will be blessed in all that you do. Their land would flourish, their families would grow, their enemies would flee. But above all these blessings was a greater truth. They were loved, treasured, chosen, not for a moment, but forever. And that truth still echoes today. You too are chosen, not because of what you have done, but because of who he is: a faithful God, a loving Father. He sees beyond your weakness. He speaks worth into your identity. He calls you his own, not because you've earned it, but because he delights in you. When you feel forgotten, remember he chose you. When you feel small, remember his love is not measured by size. When you feel unworthy, remember his affection is not based on merit. He has set his love upon you. You are his treasured possession. So walk in his ways, keep his commands, guard your heart against all that seeks to divide your devotion. For the Lord your God is with you, and his covenant of love will never fail. You are chosen, you are loved, you are his. Deuteronomy 28. Obey the Lord and walk in his overflowing blessings. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. The morning sun rose over the plains of Moab, golden and full of promise. The people of Israel stood still, their eyes fixed on Moses, the servant of the Lord, who had led them through wilderness and wonder, fire and famine, water and war. They were on the edge now, on the threshold of the land the Lord had promised to their ancestors. The land flowing with milk and honey was just beyond the Jordan. But before they entered, Moses spoke once more, not with tales of the past, but with a vision of the future, a warning, a hope, a choice. If you fully obey the Lord your God, he began, his voice steady, carried on the wind, and carefully follow all his commands I give you today. Then came the promise, layer upon layer, blessing upon blessing. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. No place would be beyond the reach of God's favor. Whether in fields or homes, in business or rest, blessing would follow them like a shadow at noon. The fruit of your womb will be blessed. Their children would rise strong and healthy. Their families would flourish, generations rooted in covenant. Your baskets and kneading troughs will be blessed. There would be provision, abundance, not the scraps of survival, but the full table of the faithful. You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. Every journey, every return, the daily rhythm of life wrapped in divine favor. And it didn't stop there. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. Victory would not come by their strength, but by the presence of God who walked before them. One way the enemy would come, but 7 ways they would flee. The Lord will send a blessing on your barns and on everything you put your hand to. Work would not be toil without fruit. Every honest effort, every act of obedience, every small beginning, he would bless it. The Lord will establish you as his holy people. They would not just be blessed, they would be set apart, a people known by his name, a light among the nations, and all the peoples of the earth would see and know. They will fear you, Moses said, because they will see that the name of the Lord is upon you. But the blessing had a path, and the path had a condition: obedience, not partial, not when it was convenient, not selective, but wholehearted, faithful, steadfast. Obey the Lord, walk in his ways, cling to his voice, and the blessings would overflow like rivers in a dry land. But Moses, ever faithful, spoke also of the other road, the one marked by rebellion, forgetfulness, and pride. If you do not obey the Lord your God, and do not carefully follow all his commands, Then curses would come instead of blessing. The sky would turn to bronze, the ground to iron. Instead of increase, there would be loss. Instead of victory, defeat. The same God who promised to bless would also discipline, not out of cruelty, but out of covenant, because to reject his word was to reject life itself. Two paths, one decision, life or death, blessing or curse, faithfulness or forgetfulness. Moses pleaded with them, not with force but with truth. Choose life, he would later say, so that you and your children may live. And even now, the same choice remains. The voice of the Lord still calls out, follow me, obey me, walk with me, not to earn blessings, but to live within them, to dwell in the overflow of his presence, to become a people marked not just by what they have, but by who they follow. For the God who promised is faithful, and when we walk in his ways, we walk under the shadow of his goodness. Blessed in the city, blessed in the field, blessed when we rise, blessed when we rest. For the Lord is our shepherd, and his blessings never run dry for those who follow his voice. Genesis 37. Joseph's dreams and God's greater plan. Sometimes the dreams God places in our hearts don't make sense, not to those around us, and not even to us. But God's plans are never random. Even when they lead through hardship, rejection, or betrayal, he is writing something greater than we can see. Joseph was just 17 when the dreams began. He was the son of Jacob, deeply loved, uniquely favored. Jacob had given him a special robe, a richly ornamented coat, unlike anything his brothers had, a symbol of affection and a source of envy. Joseph's brothers watched him with narrowed eyes, not just because of the coat, but because of the calling. Joseph had dreams. In one dream they were in the fields binding sheaves of grain, and Joseph's sheaf rose and stood upright, while the others gathered around and bowed low before it. When he shared it, they bristled. Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? Then came another dream. This time the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. Even his father rebuked him for it, though Jacob kept the matter in his heart, pondering what it could mean. The dream stirred something deep, something divine. But dreams often come before the storm. Joseph's brothers hated him, so much so that when the opportunity came, they took it. One day, while Joseph was sent to check on them in the fields near Shechem, they saw him approaching from a distance, his colorful robe shining in the sun. Here comes that dreamer, they sneered. Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dreams. But God was still at work, even in their hatred. Reuben, the eldest, convinced them not to shed blood. Instead, they threw Joseph into a dry cistern, a pit in the ground, cold, dark, and empty, a place that felt like the end. But the story wasn't over. As they sat down to eat, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared on the horizon, journeying toward Egypt. Judah spoke up. What will we gain if we kill our brother? Let's sell him instead. And so they did. For 20 pieces of silver they handed their brother over. The dreamer was gone. They dipped his robe in goat's blood and brought it back to Jacob, saying they had found it in the wilderness. Jacob saw the robe, recognized it, and broke down in grief. Surely a wild animal has devoured him. He wept, and he mourned for many days. But Joseph wasn't dead. He was on his way to Egypt, a foreign land, an unknown future. It seemed like the dream had been shattered, but the dream wasn't dead. It was just beginning, because God's greater plan wasn't to give Joseph comfort, it was to give him purpose, to prepare him not only to survive the pit, but to rule from the palace. What Joseph didn't know was that the very path of pain he was walking would become the path of providence. That betrayal would lead to blessing. That rejection would prepare him for leadership. That dreams delayed are not dreams denied. God was weaving a story far beyond what Joseph or his brothers could comprehend, and through every twist he was present. Joseph would go on to serve in Potiphar's house, be falsely accused, thrown into prison, and forgotten by men, but never forgotten by God, because the Lord was with him, in the pit, in the prison, and one day in the palace. He would rise to become second in command over all of Egypt. He would save nations from famine. He would forgive the very brothers who betrayed him. and in time the dream would come true. His brothers would bow before him not in fear but in awe of what God had done. Joseph would say, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." This is what Genesis 37 begins to show us, that even when the coat is stripped away, even when we are thrown into a pit, even when the road seems lost and the dream feels broken, God is still writing. The pit is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of God's greater plan. So if you've had a dream, a calling, a whisper from God that others have laughed at, rejected or tried to silence, remember Joseph, and remember the God who never lets go of what he begins. The dream still lives, and God is still working, even in the silence, even in the storm, even in the pit. Here comes that dreamer, let them say it, because the dreamer walks with God. Genesis 45. Forgiveness and restoration in the midst of trials. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" There are moments when the weight of betrayal and hardship seems unbearable. A time when wounds appear too deep to heal, and bitterness threatens to rule the heart. In the unfolding drama of Joseph's life, a moment arrived that would redefine pain as a pathway to profound forgiveness and restoration. Joseph, once cast into a pit and sold into slavery by his own brothers, had endured years of hardship, from the slavery of Egypt to the solitude of imprisonment. All the while, God was working behind the scenes, fashioning a plan that no man could ever imagine. Through every trial, Joseph's faith never wavered. He trusted that even the darkest moments would yield to God's redeeming love. Then came the day of reckoning, when his brothers, burdened by guilt and fear, stood before him in the courts of Egypt. They had returned to their homeland, unaware that the dreamer they had once scorned was now a ruler, a man whose influence reached far and wide. As they bowed before him, their eyes filled with regret and terror, Joseph could no longer contain the emotions that had been kept hidden for so long. His voice trembled yet rang clear as he declared, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" In that moment, the years of separation, the wounds of betrayal, and the pain of loss seemed to converge. But instead of revenge, Joseph chose forgiveness. He invited his brothers to come closer. The halls that once echoed with anger and discord now resonated with sorrowful weeping, and the tender sound of reconciliation. His heart, scarred by past hurts, was mended by an overwhelming grace, a grace that transformed bitterness into healing, judgment into compassion. Joseph said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." With these words, he revealed the divine purpose behind every hardship. Every moment of suffering was part of a greater tapestry, woven by the hand of the Almighty, a tapestry that would not only restore his own life, but also bring salvation to countless others. In the midst of trials that had once threatened to shatter his spirit, Joseph experienced a powerful restoration. His forgiveness was not a denial of the pain or a forgetting of the past. It was an embrace of the truth that God's plans far exceed our understanding. In forgiving his brothers, Joseph found that restoration was at hand, a renewed family, a healed past, and the promise of a future set by divine grace. For his brothers, the journey toward redemption began that day. They wept not only for the wrongs they had done, but also for the startling revelation of God's redemptive power. In that moment, the bitter memories of betrayal gave way to a hope that promised renewal. Even as tears fell, hearts were opened, and the bonds of kinship were restored under the guidance of a God who never forsakes his own. Joseph's act of forgiveness served as a beacon of hope. It showed that even when we face the deepest wounds, when the scars of past hurts seem too deep to heal, God can transform our pain into a powerful testimony of his love. Restored relationships and renewed futures are born out of the courage to forgive, a courage that springs from trust in the one who redeems all things. And so Joseph's story reminds us no trial is too great, no betrayal too deep, no pain too permanent for the transformative power of God's love. In the midst of adversity, He calls us to forgive, to let go of bitterness, and to embrace the restoration that only He can bring. When you are weighed down by the burdens of your past, when you feel broken by betrayal or loss, remember Joseph. Remember that God can turn your hurt into healing, your sorrow into a testament of His grace. For in the tapestry of life, every thread of pain and every moment of trial can be woven into a masterpiece of forgiveness and restoration, if we choose to trust in Him. Nehemiah 4. Stand firm and let the Lord fight for you. There are times in life when doing the right thing invites resistance, when every step forward feels like a battle, when the very act of rebuilding, whether it's a dream, a family, a future, or a heart, draws the attention of the enemy. But it's in these moments that we learn the fight is not ours alone. The Lord Himself stands with us. Nehemiah had returned to Jerusalem with a vision, a mission to rebuild the broken walls of the city. The ruins were not just stone and rubble. They were the remnants of a people who had been scattered, discouraged, forgotten. But Nehemiah saw what others had stopped believing, that restoration was possible. So the work began. Brick by brick, hand by hand, the people rallied. Fathers and sons, priests and merchants, each took their place along the wall. The sound of tools striking stone filled the air with hope. But not everyone rejoiced. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and others heard that the wall was going up, they were filled with rage. They mocked the workers. What are these feeble Jews doing? Can they bring the stones back to life? Tobiah laughed and said, even a fox climbing on it would break down their wall of stones. Mockery, threats, intimidation. The enemy used every weapon they could to bring fear. But Nehemiah did not respond with anger. He turned to prayer. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. He laid the insults before the Lord, not seeking revenge but trusting that God would defend their cause. And then he kept building. The people had a mind to work, but as the wall grew, so did the enemy's rage. Plots were formed, attacks whispered in the dark, word spread of ambushes, fear crept in. Some began to doubt. They will attack us, we won't see it coming. Nehemiah saw it too, but he did not panic. He posted guards, he placed families by their sections of the wall, swords at their sides. He looked at the trembling workers, and he spoke words that still echo through time. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. And the people remembered. They took heart. They picked up their tools and their swords. From that day on, half the men worked, and half stood guard. Builders carried materials in one hand and a weapon in the other. Even those fetching water did so with armor on their backs. They were ready, not just to build but to defend. Yet through it all they did not place their trust in weapons. Nehemiah said, our God will fight for us. That was their confidence, not in numbers, not in strength, but in the God who sees every threat, hears every whisper, and stands with His people in every battle. And because they did not stop, because they stood firm, the wall continued to rise. What the enemy meant to stop, God used to strengthen. The threats didn't disappear. The opposition didn't go silent, but neither did the people. They kept building, they kept watching, they kept praying, and the Lord, true to His word, fought for them. The story of Nehemiah 4 is more than a chapter in ancient history. It's a message to every weary heart that's trying to rebuild. If you are facing opposition, if you are mocked, doubted, threatened, do not give in to fear. Stand firm. Remember the Lord. He is great and awesome, and the battle is not yours to carry alone. Sometimes the enemy wants to make you think that the work is useless, that your walls will never rise, that your family will never heal, that your purpose is broken beyond repair. But those are lies, because when God calls you to build, He also promises to protect. When He stirs your heart to rise, He does not leave you alone in the fight. The weapon formed against you may rise, but it will not prosper. So build with one hand, and keep your sword in the other. Pray, watch, work, and trust that your God, the one who called you, the one who goes before you, is fighting even now. Stand firm, and let the Lord fight for you. Lamentations 3. Great is your faithfulness in every season. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. There are seasons when the sky feels heavy with sorrow, when each step forward feels like a struggle, and even hope seems distant. For the prophet Jeremiah, this was not just poetry, it was the reality of his people, and the cry of his own heart. Jerusalem, once filled with joy and song, now lay desolate. The streets were silent. The temple, where praises once rose, was reduced to ashes. Grief hovered over the land like a cloud that would not lift. In the heart of this devastation, Jeremiah wrote, I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He began. His words were raw, his pain unfiltered. He spoke of darkness instead of light, of broken bones and bitterness, of feeling shut in, trapped, unheard. He described his soul as bowed down, crushed beneath the weight of sorrow. And yet, even in the middle of mourning, something powerful rose within him. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The shift was quiet, almost unnoticed at first, but it was real. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. It was not a denial of the pain, but a declaration in the midst of it, a light flickering in the shadows, stubborn against the dark. God's faithfulness had not left. His mercy had not run dry. His love had not changed with the seasons. Every morning, even those filled with weeping, came with new mercy, fresh compassion, a reminder that God's faithfulness endures, even when everything else seems to fall away. Jeremiah's soul, once bowed low, began to rise again. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. To wait for the Lord is to trust that he is still writing the story, even when the chapter feels unbearable. It's to believe that sorrow may last for a night, but joy comes with the morning. Not always quickly, but surely. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Jeremiah was not just writing for himself. His words carried the weight of generations, those who had suffered loss, those who had wandered far, those who had forgotten that even in judgment, God's mercy was present, and still God remained faithful, unshaken, close. Though the world around them crumbled, God's character did not. For no one is cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. The same hand that allowed sorrow also held the power to restore. The same voice that spoke judgment would speak again of healing. Jeremiah looked honestly at the suffering, but he also looked beyond it, to the God who hears, to the God who restores, to the God who is faithful in every season. So when your heart feels heavy, and your soul is weary, when the night is long, and comfort feels far, remember these words. His mercies are new every morning. His compassions never fail. Great is his faithfulness. Even in the ashes, his promises remain. Even in the waiting, his love holds firm. And in every season, joy or sorrow, loss or restoration, he is there, unchanging, present, faithful. Jeremiah 6. Stand at the crossroads and seek the ancient paths. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. The city of Jerusalem stood on the edge of destruction. The streets, once filled with laughter and life, now echoed with uncertainty. The people had wandered far from God, their hearts hardened, their ears deaf to his voice. They had built altars to foreign gods, trusted in their own strength, and ignored the warnings of the prophets. And now judgment was near. The prophet Jeremiah stood at the gates, his voice carrying through the marketplace, calling out to a people who refused to listen. This is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Crossroads, a place of decision, a moment of choice. Would they continue down the path of rebellion, trusting in their own wisdom, chasing after the desires of their hearts? Or would they turn back to the ancient ways, the ways of truth, righteousness, and devotion to the Lord? Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it. The ancient paths, the way of their forefathers, the way of Abraham, who trusted in God's promises, the way of Moses, who led the people in obedience, the way of David, who sought the Lord with all his heart. It was not a new way, nor a hidden one. It had always been there, waiting for them to return. And if they walked in it, you will find rest for your souls. Rest, not just relief from their enemies, not just security for their nation, but a deeper rest, a peace that could only come from being right with God. But the people shook their heads. We will not walk in it. They refused the good way. They rejected the warnings. They silenced the prophets, preferring to listen to those who spoke only what they wanted to hear. False voices filled the land, declaring peace when there was no peace, covering sin with empty words instead of repentance. They dressed the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. The warning signs were clear. The enemy was coming from the north. Destruction would sweep over the land. Their walls would not save them. Their alliances would fail. Their wealth would be worthless. God had spoken. The choice was before them. I appointed watchmen over you, and said, listen to the sound of the trumpet. But you said, we will not listen. They had closed their ears to the call of repentance. They had hardened their hearts against the mercy of God. And now, judgment was near. But even in the midst of warning, hope remained. For those who would listen, for those who would turn back, for those who would seek the ancient paths and walk in them. The crossroads still stood before them, and it stands before us today. Every day we are faced with the same choice. The way of the world, filled with self-reliance, compromise and fleeting pleasures, or the way of the Lord, marked by truth, righteousness, and eternal peace. Stand at the crossroads and look. Look at where your path is leading. Look at the fruit of your choices. Look at the voice calling you back. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it. His way has never changed. It is the way of faith, the way of obedience, the way of surrender. And for those who walk in it, there is rest. Not just rest from the burdens of life, but rest for the soul, a peace that the world cannot give, and nothing can take away. The choice remains. Which path will you walk? Jeremiah 11. The Lord's covenant and his everlasting promises. Obey me, and do everything I command you, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. Then I will fulfill the oath I swore to your ancestors, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, the land you possess today. The air was heavy with the weight of prophecy. As Jeremiah walked through the streets of Jerusalem, the people moved about their business, trading, building, living, unaware that judgment loomed on the horizon. The Lord had spoken to Jeremiah, his voice firm yet sorrowful. Listen to the terms of this covenant, and tell them to the people of Judah, and to those who live in Jerusalem. A covenant, a sacred promise. Long ago the Lord had chosen this people, calling them out of slavery, leading them through the wilderness, and planting them in a land of abundance. He had given them his law, his protection, his presence, and in return, he had asked for their faithfulness. Obey me, and I will be your God. Walk in my ways, and you will be my people. It was not a burden, but a promise, a life of blessing, a future of peace, a relationship with the Almighty. But they had turned away, yet they did not listen or pay attention. Instead, they followed the stubbornness of their evil hearts. The covenant had been broken. The people had worshipped other gods, bowing before lifeless idols, chasing after nations that did not know the Lord. They had trusted in alliances instead of in their deliverer, in wealth instead of in his provision, in their own ways instead of his commands. And now, the consequences were coming. I will bring on them a disaster they cannot escape. Although they cry out to me, I will not listen to them. The words were heavy, final, yet they were not spoken in anger alone. but in grief. The Lord had been patient. He had sent prophets to warn them, calling them back to the covenant, pleading for their return. But they had refused to listen. Do not pray for this people, nor offer any plea or petition for them, because I will not listen when they call to me in their time of distress. Judgment would come, the cities would fall, the land would be stripped bare. But even in judgment, God's promises remained. Though they had broken the covenant, He would not break His word, for His faithfulness was not like man's. His love was not fleeting. One day, He would restore them. One day, He would make a new covenant, one not written on tablets of stone, but on hearts of flesh. I will put my law in their minds, and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. The Lord's promises would endure, and today, they still stand. He calls us to obedience, not as a burden, but as an invitation, a life of blessing, a future of peace, a relationship with the Almighty. But we must choose. Do we follow our own ways, trusting in the things of this world, or do we walk in His covenant, trusting in the one who never fails? Obey me, and I will be your God. The call remains, the promise is everlasting, and for those who listen, for those who turn back, His arms are always open. Jeremiah 23. The righteous branch. The Lord is our shepherd. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. The land was heavy with corruption, the weight of injustice pressing down upon the people. The shepherds, those entrusted with leading, guiding, and protecting, had failed in their calling. Instead of tending to the flock, they had scattered them. Instead of feeding the weak, they had grown fat themselves. The priests twisted the truth. The prophets spoke words the people wanted to hear, not what the Lord had commanded. The kings sought their own gain, their own power, their own glory, and the people, they wandered, lost and afraid, searching for guidance but finding none. The Lord watched. He saw the suffering, the confusion, the betrayal of those who should have been faithful. He saw the leaders who had abandoned their duty, and He spoke. Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Because you have scattered my flock and driven them away, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done. The warning was clear. Judgment was coming, not just upon the people, but upon those who had led them astray. The unfaithful shepherds would be held accountable. They had turned their backs on truth, had chosen power over righteousness, had allowed sin to flourish among the people of God, and now they would face the consequences. But the Lord's judgment was not without hope. In the midst of His warning, a promise rose like the first light of dawn. I myself will gather the remnant of my flock, He declared. I will bring them back to their pasture, where they will be fruitful and increase in number. I will place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing. The people had been scattered, but they would not remain so. The Lord Himself would gather them, like a shepherd calling his sheep home. No longer would they be lost. No longer would they be vulnerable. No longer would they suffer under the hands of leaders who cared only for themselves. But the promise did not end there. It stretched beyond the moment, beyond the coming years, beyond the exile and return. It reached towards something greater, someone greater. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. A king was coming, not like the kings of Judah who had failed their people, not like the rulers who had abandoned righteousness. This king would be different. He would be wise. He would be just. He would not seek power for himself but would rule with truth and compassion. And his name, the Lord our righteous Savior. The people of Israel waited. The days of exile would come, the pain of loss, the weight of judgment. But beyond it all, they clung to the promise of the righteous King, a shepherd who would not fail them, a leader who would not turn away, a Savior who would make all things right. And generations later, in the town of Bethlehem, a child would be born, a son of David, a king who would reign forever, a shepherd who would gather his lost sheep. He would stand among the people, looking upon them with compassion, calling them to himself. I am the good shepherd, he would say. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The leaders of his day would be no different than those of Jeremiah's time, corrupt, self-serving, unfaithful to their calling. But the true shepherd had come. The righteous branch had been raised up. The king had arrived. And even now his voice calls out, to the lost, to the weary, to the scattered. He gathers, he restores, he leads his people to green pastures, to still waters, to the place where fear is no more. For the Lord is our shepherd, and in him we lack nothing. Jeremiah 29. God's plans to prosper you and give you a future. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. The days were long, the nights even longer. The people of Israel sat in exile, far from their homeland, their hearts weighed down by sorrow. Jerusalem, the city of their fathers, lay in ruins. The temple, the dwelling place of the Most High, was no more. To many it felt as if hope itself had crumbled with the fallen walls of Zion. They longed for deliverance, for an end to their suffering. They cried out to the Lord, waiting for the day he would restore them. And then a letter came. It was from the prophet Jeremiah, sent by the hand of messengers from Jerusalem to the exiles in Babylon. The words it carried were not what they expected. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have children. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Settle down, build, plant, multiply. These were not the words of immediate rescue. These were words of endurance. The exile would not be brief. They would not return home tomorrow, nor the next day. Instead, the Lord instructed them to live, to thrive, even in the midst of their captivity. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. They were not to resist, nor rebel. Instead, they were to pray for the very land of their captivity. It was a difficult command, yet within it lay a profound truth. God's hand was still upon them. He had not forgotten them. Even in Babylon, he had a purpose for his people. Yet, false prophets arose among them, whispering words of quick deliverance, promising an end to their exile before its time. The people's hearts stirred with longing, eager to believe. But the Lord had already spoken. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them. The truth was clear. Their exile would last 70 years. A full generation would pass before the Lord would bring them home. Yet, even in this, there was a promise, one of hope, not despair. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. The years would pass, the seasons would change, but the faithfulness of God would remain unshaken. And then came the words that would echo through the ages, words of comfort, of assurance, of unshakable promise. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Not forgotten, not abandoned. The plans of the Lord were not for their destruction, but for their restoration. His purpose was not wrapped in ruin, but in redemption. Then you will call on me, and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me, when you seek me with all your heart. He was near, even in exile, even in suffering, even in the midst of waiting. He was near. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. The years in Babylon were not the end of their story. The pain of exile was not the final chapter. The Lord himself would gather them, restore them, bring them home. What seemed like an ending was merely the beginning of a greater work, a deeper renewal, a fuller restoration. The same promise stands today. When the road seems long and uncertain, when waiting feels endless, when hope seems distant, the plans of the Lord remain steadfast. His purpose is not to harm, but to prosper. His desire is not to abandon, but to restore. For those who trust in him, for those who seek him with all their hearts, he is near. He listens, he answers, he redeems, and in his perfect time, he will bring his people into the fullness of his promise, a future of hope, a future secured by his hand, a future written by the one who never fails. Esther 2. Esther is crowned for a divine purpose. The palace of Susa gleamed under the blaze of the Persian sun, its marble columns stretching into skies of endless blue. Within its gates, the affairs of an empire moved like great rivers, swift, powerful, and often unseen. Yet, amidst the currents of politics and power, a quieter story was unfolding, a story not of human design, but of divine orchestration. In the shadowed courts, where decisions of kings could change the course of nations, a young Jewish woman, hidden among exiles, prepared to step into destiny. Her name was Hadassah. Though in this foreign land, she was called Esther. She was no daughter of royal blood, no wielder of earthly power, orphaned and raised by her cousin Mordecai. Esther's life had been marked by humility and quiet obedience, yet the hand of God, unseen but unfailing, was upon her. When the call went out to gather young women for the king's search for a new queen, Esther was taken, plucked from her simple life and thrust into the palace, into a world of perfumes and politics, of intrigue and ambition. But Esther did not trust in beauty, nor in favor. She trusted in the God who had been her refuge in every season. For months she was prepared, anointed with oils, clothed with fine garments. Yet it was her spirit that shone brighter than any jewel. The keeper of the women, Haggai, looked upon her with kindness, for the grace of God went before her. And when the time came for Esther to enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, she asked for nothing but what was appointed. She sought no advantage, no adornment beyond what was given. Her beauty was radiant, but it was her heart, quiet, steadfast, surrendered, that captured the eyes of a king. And the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight, more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. The crown was heavy upon her brow, yet heavier still was the calling hidden within it. Esther's coronation was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a divine mission. The God who watches over sparrows had not forgotten his people, even in the heart of a foreign empire. He had set Esther in the palace, not for luxury, but for legacy, not for comfort, but for courage. The festivities swirled around her, banquets, proclamations, the rejoicing of the court. Yet even as the golden cup was lifted, and the crowds cheered, a deeper purpose stirred within her spirit. She had been crowned, not for herself, but for her people. She had been placed, not by chance, but by providence. Mordecai stood at the gate, watching, waiting, praying. His faith was a silent pillar beneath Esther's rising. He knew, though Esther herself did not yet fully grasp it, that she was chosen for such a time as this. The enemy would soon rise, the threat would soon be spoken, but the answer had already been prepared. A young woman in a foreign palace, a hidden deliverer clothed in royal robes, a crown placed by the hand of God. The celebrations continued, but heaven leaned close, watching the unfolding of a plan, older than kings and stronger than empires. For the purposes of God cannot be thwarted. And though Esther did not yet see the road ahead, she stepped forward with quiet faith, wrapped in a destiny larger than herself. The throne was not her safety, the crown was not her glory. Her refuge and strength were in the Lord, who raises up and brings low, who weaves every thread of history into a tapestry of redemption. And forever and ever, across kingdoms and generations, her story would proclaim, for such a time as this, the Lord crowns his servants for his divine purpose. Proverbs 16. Commit your plans to the Lord and succeed. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. The morning breeze stirred gently through the bustling marketplace of the ancient city. Merchants opened their stalls, craftsmen arranged their tools, and travelers paused to chart their routes. There, among the rhythm of daily life, an old teacher sat beneath a cedar tree, with a scroll spread across his lap. A group of young men gathered around him, drawn not only by curiosity, but by the quiet authority in his presence. They had questions about ambition, success, direction, and dreams. They spoke of plans and pursuits, of rising in the world, of shaping their future with determination and skill. The old man listened with a smile, nodding gently, for he too had once stood at the edge of youthful desire, full of longing to make his mark on the world. Then, with a voice rich in both wisdom and humility, he began to speak. To humans belong the plans of the heart, he said, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue. The young men leaned in, eager. He continued, all a person's ways may seem pure in their own eyes, but motives are weighed by the Lord. There was a pause, a holy silence, as the weight of those words settled over them. You may have goals, he said. You may set your path and dream your dreams. But know this, only when you commit your plans to the Lord will they find their true direction. Not every good idea is a God idea, and not every path that seems smooth leads to peace. The men shifted, thoughtful now, as the old teacher pointed upward. There is one who sees beyond what you see. He knows not just your steps, but your heart. He knows the hidden desires, the quiet fears, the secret pride. And if you lay your plans at his feet, if you surrender them fully, he will establish them. He will shape them. He will purify your motives and lead you not just to success, but to purpose. One of the young men asked, but what if we fail, even after committing our plans to him? The teacher's eyes softened. Failure in the eyes of men is not failure in the hands of God. Sometimes he redirects us. Sometimes he allows struggle to shape us. But never forget, the Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the things we do not understand. He spoke then of pride, warning them not to exalt themselves, not to trust too much in their own wisdom. Pride goes before destruction, he said, a haughty spirit before a fall. Better to live humbly with the lowly than to share plunder with the proud. He looked around at each of them. Whoever gives heed to instruction prospers, and blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord. There were nods now, agreement blooming slowly, like the first light of dawn. The old teacher knew their hearts burned with desire, but he longed for them to burn also with reverence, with a holy dependence on the one who governs all things. Wisdom, he said, is not just in planning, it is in trusting, and real strength is found not in self-reliance, but in surrender. As the day grew warmer, and the sounds of the city grew louder, the teacher rolled up the scroll and placed it gently beside him. He stood and placed a hand on the shoulder of one of the young men. Go, he said, plan, build, dream, but do so with an open hand. Let the Lord shape what you hold, for when your heart is fully his, your steps will be firm, your plans will find life, and even your failures will become part of his greater story. And as they walked away from the shade of the cedar, each one carried not just the wisdom of a proverb, but the quiet assurance that committing their plans to the Lord would lead them somewhere far greater than success. It would lead them to him.